If you have ever felt like the country you spent a lifetime building is being mocked by the very people lucky enough to find refuge here, then you need to pay close attention to what happened on that CNN stage. Most politicians would have folded under the pressure of a biased network and a hostile moderator. But they forgot one thing about the man from Queens. Donald Trump never goes into a fight without the receipts. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on a confrontation that didn't just break the internet with nearly 200 million views. It fundamentally shifted the political landscape of this nation. Stick around until the end, because I am going to show you the exact moment a meticulously organized binder of evidence turned a congresswoman's career into a cautionary tale. You will see why the phrase "love it or leave it" became more than just a slogan. It became a mandate for anyone seeking to represent the American people. The atmosphere inside that New York studio was thick with an arrogance that only the mainstream media can produce. CNN thought they had set the perfect trap, inviting a diverse voice like Ilhan Omar to lecture the president on his own immigration policies during a live town hall. They had their fact-checkers lined up in the back room like a firing squad, ready to jump on every syllable Trump uttered. Their cameras were positioned to catch even a flicker of discomfort on the president's face, hoping for a viral clip of him being silenced by identity politics. It was supposed to be a win for the establishment, a moment where the squad finally put the outsider in his place. But while the network was busy practicing their talking points, Donald Trump was busy doing his homework. He arrived not with a teleprompter or a team of crisis consultants, but with a single, thick tab binder that contained the documented history of a woman who thought her hijab made her untouchable. He knew that in the cutthroat world of Manhattan real estate, you don't win by being the loudest person in the room. You win by having the truth on paper. As the lights went up and the audience settled, it became clear that Jake Tapper wasn't just moderating a debate. He was refereeing a tactical demolition. Backstage, the contrast couldn't have been more telling for anyone who understands the reality of Washington power plays. Omar's green room was a frantic hive of lawyers and communications experts, all trying to figure out how to pivot every question back to accusations of Islamophobia. They were coaching her to use her personal story as a shield, convinced that crying racism would be enough to shut down any real inquiry into her past. Meanwhile, Trump sat alone with a Diet Coke and his records, smiling because he knew he was about to drop a political nuclear bomb on live television. When they finally stepped onto the stage, the visual was striking. Omar in her designer blazer that likely cost more than a month's mortgage for most folks in the Midwest, and Trump in his signature red tie. The crowd was a mix of supporters and skeptics, but even the most cynical person in the room felt the shift in energy. Omar wasted no time, going for the throat in the very first minute by claiming the President of the United States didn't belong in his own office. She called him a xenophobe and an embarrassment to the nation, essentially telling 63 million Americans that their choice for leader was a mistake. Trump just sat there with a grin that should have warned her she was walking into a buzzsaw. He disarmed her initial hostility with a bit of charm, complimenting her color choice before pivoting with the speed of a professional boxer. He didn't start with policy or statistics. He started with the heart of what it means to be an American. He brought up her comments from 2019, those infamous 4 words that every patriot remembers with a sting of betrayal. Some people did something. If you believe that our leaders should respect the gravity of our history and the sacrifices of our heroes, please take a moment right now to comment below with the word patriot and subscribe to this channel, so we can keep bringing you the truth the media tries to bury. The president didn't just quote her. He had the video ready to play on the massive screens for everyone to see. There was Omar, shrugging off the murder of nearly 3,000 people on September 11th as if it were a minor inconvenience on her way to a political point. Trump let the silence hang in the air after the clip ended, letting the gravity of her dismissiveness sink into the minds of every viewer. He spoke about his own experience in New York that day, watching the towers fall and seeing the missing person posters that lined the streets. He reminded her that she came here as a refugee from a war-torn country, and instead of gratitude, she offered minimization for our national trauma. He asked the question that no one else had the courage to ask: who really doesn't belong here? Is it the man elected by the people to defend the Constitution, or the congresswoman who views the worst terrorist attack in our history as a footnote? The room erupted, and you could see the confidence start to drain from Omar's face as she realized her usual defenses weren't going to work this time. Trump was just getting started, and he was about to move from her public comments to the deep, dark secrets hidden in her own family history. The binder came open, and the first tab was labeled with a name that Omar had spent years trying to erase from the public record: Ahmed Noor Said Elmi. Most of the mainstream media had dismissed the allegations of her marrying her own brother as a conspiracy theory, but Trump wasn't interested in theories. He had the marriage certificates, the school records from Somalia, and the social media posts that her family had tried to scrub from the internet. He laid out a timeline that looked less like a personal life and more like a sophisticated attempt to game the United States immigration system. Trump walked the audience through the overlapping relationships and the legal marriages that didn't seem to match the reality of her living situation. He pointed out the birth dates and the family photos that showed her husband and her brother were the same person. It wasn't just a personal attack. It was a demonstration of a pattern of deception by someone who currently holds a security clearance. He challenged her right then and there to prove him wrong with a simple DN, a test, or a birth certificate, but all he got in return was a stunned, icy silence. The president didn't let up for a second, pivoting from immigration fraud to the cold, hard numbers of campaign finance. He pulled out the FEC filings that showed nearly $3 million of donor money from hard-working teachers and nurses, flowing directly into the pockets of her new husband's consulting firm. He called it what it was: a family grift funded by the very people she claimed to represent. In the world of business, that's a con job, and Trump made sure every person watching at home knew exactly how their contributions were being spent. The president knew that exposing financial grifts was only the beginning. He needed to address the fundamental question of national security and where a representative's heart truly lies. He turned the page in that famous binder to a section that made even the seasoned technicians in the CNN control booth hold their breath. Trump leaned forward, his voice dropping to a gravelly, serious tone as he brought up the college interview where Omar was caught on camera, making air quotes while discussing Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah. He didn't just talk about it. He forced the network to play the footage of her mocking the very names of groups that have spilled American blood on our soil and across the globe. Watching her fingers trace those air quotes on the giant screens was a visceral gut punch to every veteran and 9/11's family member watching. Trump pointed at the screen with the precision of a prosecutor, noting that she described terrorism not as an evil to be eradicated, but as a reaction from victims of Western imperialism. He reminded the audience that while Omar was playing word games with terrorist organizations, thousands of American sailors and Marines had been lost to the very group she was effectively excusing. It wasn't just a policy disagreement. It was a demonstration of a worldview that puts America last and its enemies first. The tension in the room was electric as Trump moved to her recent trips back to Somalia, where she was greeted like a conquering hero at political rallies. He played clips of her speaking in Somali, telling crowds to ask what country she is really from, implying a dual loyalty that has no place in the halls of Congress. He contrasted this with her constant barrage of insults toward the United States, a country that gave her family refuge, safety, and a platform she could never have dreamed of in Mogadishu. He stood up and challenged her to name just one time one single tweet or speech, where she praised America without adding a cynical but or a list of our supposed sins. If you are tired of seeing our country being trashed by the people who enjoy its greatest privileges, you need to make your voice heard right now. Hit that like button, comment, stand with Trump below, and make sure you are subscribed so we can keep bringing you the unfiltered truth that the mainstream media is too afraid to broadcast. Omar sat frozen, her memory seemingly blank as she failed to produce even a single positive statement about the nation that saved her. Trump didn't wait. He filled the silence with a compilation of her own words, calling America a land of genocide and stolen land. He then put the raw statistics on the screen, comparing the poverty, corruption, and lack of freedom in Somalia to the immense prosperity and protection found in the United States. He asked the pointed question that resonates with every tax-paying citizen. If this country is so fundamentally evil, why did you choose to stay? This led to the moment that would define the entire encounter and eventually launch 1,000 t-shirts. Trump looked directly into the camera and delivered the ultimatum that the silent majority had been waiting to hear for years. He told her plainly that if she hated the foundation of this country so much, she was free to leave and try her hand at politics in the place she seemed so fond of defending. He emphasized that you don't get to cash a congressional paycheck and enjoy the protection of the American flag while spend every waking hour trying to tear it down. The audience reaction was a mix of shock and thunderous approval that Jake Tapper couldn't hope to suppress. Trump concluded his closing statement by reminding everyone that he had spent 50 years building things and creating opportunities for Americans, while Omar had spent her career building a narrative of victimhood and resentment. He called her actions a betrayal of the oath she took to defend the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. As he sat down, the visual of a sitting congresswoman unable to defend her own record spoke louder than any campaign ad ever could. By the time the cameras cut to black, the political career of Ilhan was already in a tailspin from which it would never recover. Within hours, the video had racked up tens of millions of views, bypassing the media gatekeepers and going straight to the hearts of the American people. Even the most liberal outlets were forced to admit that the president had brought undeniable receipts, and the subsequent investigations into her tax and marriage records began to move with a speed we rarely see in Washington. 2 weeks later, the woman who claimed the president didn't belong in the White House was the one announcing she would not seek re-election. This story is a powerful reminder that when we stand up for our values and refuse to be intimidated by identity politics, the truth will always prevail. Donald Trump didn't just win a debate that night. He gave a voice to every American who loves this country and is tired of seeing it disrespected. We need more of that Queen Street Fighter energy in our leadership today. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with every patriot you know. If you stand for the flag and the truth, comment "love it" or "leave it" one last time to show your support for a stronger America. The true story of that night doesn't start when the red light on the camera turned on, but hours earlier in the cold, clinical hallways of CNN's New York headquarters. You have to understand that the mainstream media didn't just want a debate. They wanted a public execution of the America First movement. They had spent weeks coordinating with Omar's team, ensuring she had every advantage, every possible protection, and every gotcha question preloaded into the moderator's script. But while Omar was surrounded by a small army of crisis managers practicing how to look like a victim, Donald Trump was sitting in his dressing room, flipping through those tabbed pages with the calm of a man who already knew the ending of the movie. If you've ever felt like the system is rigged against you, watching what happened behind those curtains will confirm every suspicion you've ever had. CNN had positioned their best fact-checkers in a dedicated war room, specifically tasked with jumping to Omar's defense the second Trump brought up her controversial past. They had multiple camera angles preset to catch any sign of aggression from the president, hoping to paint him as the bully they've always claimed he is. It was a coordinated effort between a news network and a sitting congresswoman to silence the voice of the American people, but they underestimated the power of documented evidence. Trump knew that the "some people did something" comment was the key to unlocking the truth about Omar's priorities. He had his team verify the full context of that CARE event from 2019, ensuring that when he played the clip, there would be no room for her to claim she was being misquoted. He understood that for millions of Americans who watched the towers fall, those words weren't just a slip of the tongue. They were a window into a soul that doesn't value the sacrifices made on that dark day. He was prepared to remind the nation that while Omar was minimizing the murder of thousands, she was simultaneously enjoying the very freedoms those victims died to protect. Before we dive into the explosive details of the marriage fraud documents that the media tried to bury, I want to ask you to do something important. If you believe that our elected officials should be held to the same laws as every other citizen, please comment the word accountability below and subscribe to this channel right now. We are the only ones willing to show you the receipts the establishment wants to ignore. The president's binder wasn't just filled with news clippings. It contained official Minnesota Campaign Finance Board documents that proved Omar had been playing fast and loose with the law for years. Trump had the records showing she filed joint tax returns with one man while being legally married to another, a clear-cut case of fraud that would land any regular American in a windowless cell. He had the proof that she had already been fined for these violations, yet she continued to lecture the country on ethics and morality. It was this hypocrisy that Trump aimed to expose, showing that those who scream the loudest about justice are often the ones fleeing from it the fastest. As the debate moved into the specifics of her family irregularities, the atmosphere backstage at CNN turned from confidence to pure panic. Sources say the producers were frantically whispering in Jake Tapper's ear, telling him to pivot, to interrupt, to do anything to stop Trump from reading the names of the family members involved. But you can't stop a freight train with a toothpick. Trump laid out the school records and the social media posts from her own siblings that identified her husband as her brother. He showed the world that the very person she claimed she couldn't locate for a divorce was actually a part of her inner circle for years. The depth of the deception was breathtaking. Trump highlighted how Omar used her position to funnel millions of dollars into her new husband's firm, effectively creating a private ATM out of her campaign donations. He read the line items for travel expenses and consulting fees that defied all market logic, pointing out that this wasn't just politics, it was a family business funded by the American taxpayer. He looked her in the eye and asked how she could justify taking money from hardworking people in Minnesota to enrich her own household while the district she represented continued to struggle. If you think it's time to drain the swamp and put an end to these family grifts in Washington, make sure you hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Comment, drain the swamp, and share this video with one friend who needs to see the truth about what's happening to our donor dollars. By the time the debate reached its halfway point, the diversity voice that CNN had hoped would dominate the night was reduced to a series of rehearsed talking points about Islamophobia. Trump had successfully dismantled the shield of identity politics by using her own record as the weapon. He showed that being a refugee doesn't give you a license to commit fraud, and being a member of a minority group doesn't give you a pass to spread anti-Semitic tropes. He forced the audience to look past the hijab and the blazer to see the trail of broken laws and burned bridges she left in her wake. The most telling moment, however, wasn't a loud one. It was the silence that followed Trump's demand for a DNA test. In that quiet, the entire nation realized that if the allegations were truly just racist conspiracy theories, she would have ended them in a heartbeat with a simple swab of a cheek. Instead, she sat there, protected by a moderator who was trying to save her and a network that was horrified to see their narrative crumbling on live TV. It was the moment the Queen's Street Fighter proved that facts don't care about your feelings, and they certainly don't care about your protected status. The president knew that to truly dismantle a politician protected by the media, you have to follow the money and the legal trail they thought was buried in state archives. He turned the page to a section of his binder that contained the official 2014 and 2015 tax records from the state of Minnesota. While Omar was standing on the stage, trying to lecture the American people about fairness and paying your fair share, Trump was holding proof of her own hypocrisy. He showed the audience that she had filed joint tax returns with Ahmed Hersi, while she was still legally married to Ahmed Noor Saad Elmi. In any other world, this is called tax fraud, a serious violation of the law that the mainstream media had conveniently decided to ignore for years. Trump didn't just allege this. He pointed to the fact that she had already been forced to pay a fine of $3,469 to the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board for these very violations. He looked at the cameras and asked the folks at home how many of them could get away with filing fraudulent taxes and then simply writing a small check to make it all go away. It was a powerful moment that highlighted the two-tiered justice system that protects the radical left while targeting the average patriot. Trump wasn't just attacking her. He was defending the integrity of the American tax system and the rule of law that every citizen is expected to follow. This wasn't an isolated incident of bad paperwork, as her team tried to claim. It was a calculated pattern of deception. Trump moved his focus to the U.S. House of Representatives, pulling out the actual text of H.R. 183. He reminded the viewers that this wasn't a Republican resolution, but one brought forward by her own party, the Democrats, because her anti-Semitic comments were so toxic they couldn't be ignored. He read the names of the leaders who had to condemn her: Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Jerry Nadler. When your own side has to pass official resolutions to tell you to stop spreading hate, you know you've crossed a line that no amount of identity politics can fix. If you believe that no one in Washington should be above the law, regardless of their background or their party, then you need to stand with us right now. Please take a second to comment truth below and subscribe to this channel so we can continue to bring you these deep dives into the records the elites want to stay hidden. The president then brought the focus back to the "some people did something" comment, but this time he went deeper into the ideology behind it. He played more footage from that CARE event, showing the dismissive shrug she gave when discussing the most tragic day in modern American history. Trump spoke for the families who felt that sting of betrayal. The families of the 2,977 victims whose lives were reduced to a something in her speech. He reminded everyone that she had come to this country from a place of war and chaos, and yet she couldn't find the words to properly honor the nation that gave her everything. He highlighted the irony of a sitting member of Congress comparing the United States and Israel to groups like the Taliban and Hamas. He showed the clips of her making air quotes when saying the names of Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, as if their existence or their crimes were a matter of debate. For the viewers at home, especially those who remember the fear and the unity following 9/11s, this was the ultimate proof that her loyalty was not to the flag she swore an oath to protect. Trump wasn't just winning a debate. He was conducting a national intervention, forcing the country to see the radicalism that had infiltrated its government. As the binder flipped to the final sections, Trump prepared to deliver the most devastating evidence regarding her campaign finances and the millions of dollars funneled to her husband's firm. He had the FEC filings tabbed and ready, showing that the E Street Group, owned by Tim Minett, had received nearly $2.8 million from her campaign. He walked the audience through the timeline of their affair, the divorces, and the marriage that conveniently turned campaign donations into family wealth. It was a clear, documented timeline that no amount of shouting about racism could erase. The Queen's street fighter was in his element, using his decades of business experience to sniff out what he called a family grift. He pointed out that while she was lecturing Americans on the struggle of the working class, she was living a lifestyle funded by the very people she claimed to be fighting for. Trump made it personal for every donor who had sent in $20 or $50, showing them exactly where their hard-earned money was going. By the time he was done with the financial records, the image of Omar as a voice for the voiceless was shattered, replaced by the reality of a politician who had mastered the art of the swamp. The president knew that the ultimate jury in any political trial isn't found in a CNN studio or a Washington hearing room. It's found in the living rooms of hard-working Americans in places like Minnesota's 5th District. After he laid out the evidence of tax fraud and the millions funneled to her husband's firm, the ground began to shift in Minneapolis. You could see it in the polling data that Trump's team had been monitoring in real time. Within just 2 weeks of that historic confrontation, Omar's approval rating among her own constituents collapsed from a solid 61% to a staggering 23%. Even the Democrats who had once defended her as a trailblazer began to pull away, with her support among her own party members in the district dropping nearly 40 points. Trump didn't just expose her to the world. He gave her own voters the permission they needed to finally demand better. He highlighted the fact that while she was busy building a global brand based on resentment toward America, her district was dealing with rising crime and economic stagnation. The Queen street fighter had turned her own identity politics against her by showing that she didn't represent the hardworking Somali Americans of Minnesota. She represented only herself and her family's financial interests. A new challenger soon emerged, a Somali American military veteran who spoke the words that Omar could never bring herself to say. "I'm proud to be Somali American, but I'm American first." The energy was changing, and the love it or leave it movement was no longer just a phrase on a screen. It was a call to action that was raising millions of dollars for her primary opponent in a matter of days. People who had been afraid to speak up for fear of being called names were now lining up at rallies, chanting for a representative who actually loved the country they called home. Trump had broken the spell of intimidation, showing that when you have the receipts, the labels the left tries to pin on you lose all their power. If you are inspired by the sight of regular citizens taking their country back from radical career politicians, then you need to be part of this movement. Please take a moment to comment "America First" below and subscribe to this channel to ensure we can keep fighting the censors and bringing you these incredible stories of victory. The silence from Omar's office in the days following the debate was the loudest admission of guilt anyone could have asked for. Her communication team, which usually had an immediate accusation of Islamophobia ready for any critic, was in a total state of meltdown. When she finally did attempt to post a defense on social media, she was ratioed so severely that even the platform's algorithms struggled to keep up with the tidal wave of people demanding answers about her brother and her bank accounts. The shield was gone, and the mainstream media outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post were finally forced to admit that the president's allegations were backed by documented evidence. By the time the House Ethics Committee and federal authorities announced they were reopening investigations into her marriage and tax records, the writing was on the wall. 2 weeks after the most watched political destruction in television history, Ilhan Omar stood before a microphone, her voice shaking, and announced she would not seek re-election. She tried to frame it as a personal decision for her family, but the American people knew better. Donald Trump had done in 90 minutes what the entire political establishment had failed to do for years. Trump's final rally in Minneapolis after her announcement was a victory lap for the ages, with over 30,000 people cheering for a nation that demands loyalty and gratitude from its leaders. He reminded the crowd that he didn't destroy her career. She destroyed it herself through her own words and her own actions. He just made sure everyone was watching when the truth came out. This wasn't just the end of a single politician's career. It was a blueprint for how to defeat the radical left by refusing to back down and always keeping the receipts. The aftermath of that debate wasn't just about one woman losing her seat. It was about the restoration of a standard for everyone who holds public office in this great land. Donald Trump didn't just walk onto that stage to argue policy. He walked on as a master of psychological warfare, knowing exactly how to dismantle the victim shield that the radical left has spent decades perfecting. You see, the media always portrays Trump as impulsive, but what we saw in that CNN studio was a man who had spent years cataloging every slight against this country. He understood that Omar's strength relied entirely on a media apparatus that refused to ask her the hard questions, so he stepped into the role of the investigator himself. The Queen's Street Fighter knew that by bringing the actual physical binder onto the stage, he was sending a message to every corrupt politician in Washington. The days of hiding behind talking points are over. He showed the American people that you don't have to accept the narrative the mainstream media feeds you. If a member of Congress is accused of marrying her own brother to commit immigration fraud, that isn't a conspiracy theory to be dismissed. It is a serious allegation that deserves a transparent investigation. By demanding a DNA test on live television, Trump stripped away the layers of protection provided by CNN and forced the public to see the evasion for what it truly was. This moment resonated deeply with one group in particular that has often felt abandoned by the modern Democratic Party, the American Jewish community. For years, they had watched as Ilhan Omar used her platform to spread ancient tropes about Benjamins and hypnotism, only to see the House leadership offer weak, watered-down resolutions in response. Trump didn't offer a resolution. He offered a confrontation. He held up her own tweets like a mirror, forcing the world to see the ugliness that she had tried to disguise as policy criticism. He reminded everyone that the same language she used has historically led to the darkest chapters of human history, and he did so with the conviction of a man who has spent his life around the vibrant Jewish community of New York. If you believe that anti-Semitism has no place in the United States Congress, and you're glad someone finally had the courage to call it out, then we need your support now more than ever. Take a second to comment "Never Again" below and subscribe to this channel so we can continue to stand for the truth and against the radical voices trying to divide us. The impact of Trump's performance traveled far beyond the borders of Minnesota or the corridors of the Capitol. It became a global phenomenon because it represented the first time a major world leader used cold, hard facts to defeat the power of woke identity politics on its own turf. Across Europe and the rest of the West, people watched as Trump showed that you can be compassionate toward refugees while still demanding they respect the laws and the culture of the nation that took them in. He redefined the conversation around immigration, moving it away from xenophobia and back to the concepts of gratitude and legal integrity. When Trump pointed out that Omar identified as Somali first and American second, he wasn't just attacking her. He was defending the very idea of the American melting pot. He reminded us that being American is a choice and a commitment to a set of values, not just a legal status to be manipulated for personal gain. The Love It or Leave It movement grew because it spoke to a basic human truth. You cannot lead a people you do not love, and you cannot represent a country you fundamentally resent. Trump's victory that night wasn't just political. It was a cultural reclamation of American pride. As we look at the empty seat Omar left behind, we see a Washington that is slightly more accountable than it was before that 90-minute debate. The lesson for every future politician is clear. If you plan to attack this country while enjoying its benefits, you better be prepared for someone to bring the receipts. Trump showed that the truth doesn't need a 7-second delay or a biased moderator to be effective. It just needs a voice that is loud enough to be heard over the noise of the establishment. This is the legacy of that night, a reminder that in America, the people still have the final say, provided they have a leader willing to fight for them. The president knew that the ultimate jury in any political trial isn't found in a CNN studio or a Washington hearing room. It's found in the living rooms of hard-working Americans in places like Minnesota's 5th District. After he laid out the evidence of tax fraud and the millions funneled to her husband's firm, the ground began to shift in Minneapolis. You could see it in the polling data that Trump's team had been monitoring in real time. Within just 2 weeks of that historic confrontation, Omar's approval rating among her own constituents collapsed from a solid 61% to a staggering 23%. Even the Democrats who had once defended her as a trailblazer began to pull away, with her support among her own party members in the district dropping nearly 40 points. Trump didn't just expose her to the world. He gave her own voters the permission they needed to finally demand better. He highlighted the fact that while she was busy building a global brand based on resentment toward America, her district was dealing with the reality of her broken promises. The Queen Street Fighter had turned her own identity politics against her by showing that she didn't represent the hard-working Somali Americans of Minnesota. She represented only herself and her family's financial interests. A new challenger soon emerged, a Somali American military veteran who spoke the words that Omar could never bring herself to say. "I'm proud to be Somali American, but I'm American first." The energy was changing, and the love it or leave it movement was no longer just a phrase on a screen. It was a call to action that was raising millions of dollars for her primary opponent in a matter of days. People who had been afraid to speak up for fear of being called names were now lining up at rallies, chanting for a representative who actually loved the country they called home. Trump had broken the spell of intimidation, showing that when you have the receipts, the labels the left tries to pin on, you lose all their power. If you are inspired by the sight of regular citizens taking their country back from radical career politicians, then you need to be part of this movement. Please take a moment to comment "America First" below and subscribe to this channel to ensure we can keep fighting the censors and bringing you these incredible stories of victory. The silence from Omar's office in the days following the debate was the loudest admission of guilt anyone could have asked for. Her communication team, which usually had an immediate accusation of Islamophobia ready for any critic, was in a total state of meltdown. When she finally did attempt to post a defense on social media, she was ratioed so severely that even the platform's algorithms flagged it as unusual activity. The shield was gone, and the mainstream media outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post were finally forced to admit that the president's allegations were backed by documented evidence. By the time the House Ethics Committee and federal authorities announced they were reviewing her marriage and tax records, the writing was on the wall. 2 weeks after the most watched political destruction in television history, Ilhan Omar stood before a microphone, her voice shaking, and announced she would not seek re-election. She tried to frame it as a personal decision for her family, but the American people knew better. Donald Trump had destroyed her career in 90 minutes. Trump's final rally in Minneapolis after her announcement was a victory lap for the ages, with over 30,000 people cheering for a nation that demands loyalty and gratitude from its leaders. He reminded the crowd that he didn't destroy her career. She destroyed it herself through her own words and her own actions. He just made sure everyone was watching when the truth came out. This wasn't just the end of a single politician's career. It was a blueprint for how to defeat the radical left by refusing to back down and always keeping the receipts. The fallout from that 90-minute demolition didn't just end with Omar's silence. It triggered a desperate, coordinated defense from the group known as the Squad. In the hours following the debate, we saw a frantic wave of social media posts and emergency press conferences from figures like AOC and Rashida Tlaib. They didn't try to refute the binder full of marriage records or the FEC filings showing millions funneled to a consultant husband. Instead, They retreated to their only known defense, accusing the president and the entire American public of fascism and Islamophobia. But this time, the old tricks didn't work. Trump had used her own words, her own tweets, and her own signature on tax documents. You can't call a math equation racist, and you can't call a marriage certificate a hate crime. This desperate defense actually backfired, exposing the radical left's inability to deal with simple, documented facts. While the squad was busy crying foul, the American people were busy hitting the replay button on that "some people did something" clip. Even the most progressive media outlets began to feel the heat as their own viewers started asking why these allegations hadn't been reported years ago. The New York Times was finally forced to admit that the bulk of Trump's presentation was based on verified public records. For the first time in a decade, the media's protection racket for the radical left had a massive 187 million view hole in it. If you are glad to see the media finally being forced to tell the truth about these radical politicians, then you are in the right place. Please take a moment to comment "no more lies" below and subscribe to this channel right now. We are the ones bypassing the filters to bring you the raw facts. Perhaps the most significant shift occurred within the Somali American community in Minnesota's 5th District. For years, Omar had claimed to be their exclusive voice, but Trump's exposure of the "feeding our future" frog connections and her personal enrichment at the expense of her constituents changed everything. Hard-working families who had come to America for a better life realized that they were being used as political props, while their representative was busy building a $30 million net worth and ignoring the crime in their streets. They saw a president who, despite what the media said, was actually fighting for the integrity of the system that gave them refuge. This great awakening in Minnesota led to the rise of a new kind of challenger one who didn't view America as an evil empire, but as the greatest land of opportunity on earth. This military veterans campaign became a lighthouse for patriots of all backgrounds who were tired of the division and the anti-American rhetoric. When the primary polls showed Omar's support dropping to 23%, it wasn't because of racism. It was because the people had finally seen the receipts and decided they deserved a leader who loved the country as much as they did. Trump didn't just win a debate. He liberated a district from a narrative of resentment. The cultural phenomenon of "love it or leave it" became more than a slogan. It became a litmus test for those seeking to hold the trust of the American people. It forced a national conversation on what we should expect from our representatives: loyalty, gratitude, and a basic respect for our history. As the investigations by federal authorities and the House Ethics Committee began to close in, the Queen Street Fighter sat back with a satisfied smile, knowing he had done what no one else dared to do. He had used the truth to reclaim the American story from those who sought to rewrite it. If you believe that every member of Congress should have to pass a loyalty to America test, make sure you are subscribed and have your notifications on. Comment "America First" and share this video with someone who needs to see the power of the truth. We are the silent majority, and we are silent no more. The final chapter of this historic confrontation didn't take place in a television studio, but in a packed arena in the heart of Minneapolis, just weeks after Ilhan Omar announced her retirement from politics. Over 30,000 patriots filled the space, creating an ocean of red, white, and blue that signaled a new dawn for Minnesota. When Donald Trump stepped onto that stage, the roar was deafening. A 5-minute standing ovation that wasn't just for him, but for the truth he had unleashed. He didn't come to gloat. He came to deliver a message about what it means to be an American and why the victory we just witnessed was so vital for the survival of our republic. He reminded the crowd that for too long, the people of this district had been told they had to choose between their heritage and their country. Trump looked out at the diverse faces in the audience, including many Somali Americans who were waving, American flags and told them that the Queen Street fighter didn't care where you came from. He only cared about where your loyalty lies. He highlighted the fact that the real xenophobia came from those like Omar, who tried to keep their community separated from the American dream, using fear and resentment to maintain their grip on power. By exposing the receipts, Trump hadn't just defeated a politician. He had liberated a community from the chains of identity politics. As he mentioned the Love It or Leave It movement, the chant rose up from the floor, shaking the very foundations of the building. Trump smiled and let the people speak, knowing that this wasn't a call for exclusion, but a demand for respect. He explained that America is a home, not a hotel. You don't get to move in, trash the place, and then demand the owner change the rules to suit your grievances. This common-sense approach to national identity is what the radical left calls radical, but to the 30,000 people in that arena, it was the most refreshing thing they had heard in decades. If you believe that being American is the greatest privilege on earth, and you're ready to stand up for our values, then we need you with us. Please comment. God bless America below and subscribe to this channel right now. We are the home for the silent majority who are finally ready to speak out. Trump then introduced the guest who brought the house down, the Somali-American veteran who had stepped up to take Omar's place. This was the visual representation of the victory, a man who had fought for the flag, who loved the Constitution, and who didn't view his background as a weapon to be used against his neighbors. Trump pointed out that this is what true diversity looks like, a unity of purpose and a shared love for the nation. He promised the people of Minnesota that their voices would no longer be used to fund family grifts or to excuse terrorism. Instead, they would be used to rebuild their city and protect their families. The president closed the evening by reflecting on the binder he had carried onto that CNN stage. He told the crowd that the receipts weren't just for Omar. They were a warning to every squad member and every swamp creature in Washington who thinks they can hide behind a narrative. He reminded us that in the end, the American people are the ultimate fact-checkers. They don't need a biased moderator to tell them what to think. They just need a leader who isn't afraid to show them the evidence. The legacy of that 90-minute debate is a permanent shift in the political landscape, a return to a time when loyalty to the country was a requirement, not an option. As the rally ended and the crowd spilled out into the Minneapolis night, the message was clear. The era of the anti-American politician is coming to an end. We have seen that the truth, when delivered with courage and documented with facts, is an unstoppable force. Donald Trump didn't just win a fight. He restored a standard of accountability that will protect this nation for generations to come. We must stay vigilant, we must stay loud, and we must never again allow those who resent our country to be the ones who represent it. If you are ready to keep this movement going and ensure that the Love It or Leave It standard stays alive in Washington, make sure you are subscribed with notifications turned on. Comment, stay loud, and share this video with every patriot you know. The fight for America is far from over, but after that night in Minneapolis, we know exactly how to win. Trong Fontaine, Chung Ta Ji Ching Kin Bia Kan Ki Ruk Lay Ti Boogie Rally, Y Minneapolis VSS Troi DY CA, Nung Ji Jiang MTU and Chi Si MGV, DSN TEPS, TIZVI Fun 11, Kung 1.0 O Tip Theo, Hai Tron. Fine Nazen Tine Pi Trung Vao Ta Siong Lan Ta CASS Kyan Na GVVI Chin Trong Quick T Cash Kukam Min Si, I Non Non Lay Kai Niam, Long Trung Than Quick Giam, Vasess The Ji Chin Liun CCA, Hong Kong Ho Ki BGC Vao, KBSCC Tip Theo, Kia Sisi, Tip Sia, File Nas, Nan Long, Nai. KCN Lai KCA SS Kyan GVVI Chin Tran Quan DK Jam Nization CA May Non Le Kan Yijing Vivand exemples vian, misi ne cca, sion long hoga, keen by noon. The shockwaves from that CNN stage didn't stop at the American shoreline. They crossed the Atlantic and the Pacific, sparking a long overdue conversation among our global allies about the true meaning of national sovereignty and the responsibilities of leadership. For years, leaders across Europe and the West had watched the rise of radical identity politics in the United States with a mixture of concern and imitation. But when Trump pulled out that binder and demanded accountability, he provided a template for every nation struggling with internal division. From London to Paris and from Jerusalem to Rome, the message was heard loud and clear. A country that does not demand loyalty from its leaders cannot expect to survive. Trump's victory over the narrative of resentment showed the world that a nation can be a welcoming harbor for those fleeing oppression while still maintaining a backbone of steel when it comes to its own laws and values. He proved that the refugee contract is a two-way street, safety and opportunity in exchange for gratitude and allegiance. International observers noted how the Queen Street Fighter didn't just win a domestic political argument. He reestablished the moral authority of the nation-state. He showed that you don't have to apologize for your history to be a leader in the modern world, and you certainly don't have to tolerate those who use your own freedoms to undermine your security. If you believe that America should be a shining city on a hill that other nations look up to for its strength and clarity, then we need your voice in this community. Please take a second to comment leadership below and subscribe to this channel so we can continue to track how the America First movement is changing the world. Back at home, the Republican Party underwent a fundamental transformation in the wake of the Omar-Trump confrontation. No longer was the party content to play the role of the polite loser who allows the radical left to set the rules of engagement. A new generation of GOP candidates began to adopt the Trump standard. They came prepared with their own binders, their own receipts, and an absolute refusal to be intimidated by the labels of the left. The party realized that the silent majority wasn't just looking for policy papers. They were looking for a fighter who would stand up for the flag and call out the hypocrisy of those who take its benefits while spitting on its values. This strategic shift led to a historic recruitment of diverse, patriotic candidates who shattered the left's monopoly on minority voters. We saw veterans, small business owners, and legal immigrants from every background stepping forward to say, "I love this country, and I will not let it be destroyed by those who resent its success." Trump had shown them that you can't be called a racist if you're standing next to a patriot who looks different than you but loves the country just as much. He showed that the true divide in America isn't between races or religions, but between those who want to build this country up and those who want to tear it down. As we look toward the 2026 elections and beyond, the shadow of that 90-minute debate loomed large over every campaign. Candidates were now being asked point blank, "Whose side are you on?" And, "Can you name one thing you love about America without a but?" The love it or leave it standard had become a permanent part of the political lexicon, forcing a level of transparency and patriotism that had been missing from Washington for far too long. Trump's ability to use the truth as a blunt instrument had not only ended one career, it had saved the nation's sense of self-respect. If you are ready to see more patriots in Washington who aren't afraid to carry a binder and stand up for the truth, make sure you are subscribed and your notifications are on. Comment, vote Patriot, and share this video with someone who needs to know that the tide is finally turning. We are reclaiming our government, one receipt at a time. The legacy of that evening on the CNN stage is not just found in the retirement of a single politician or the viral clips that continue to rack up millions of views. It is found in the renewed spirit of the American people who realize that they no longer have to be silent in the face of those who despise our values. Donald Trump showed us that the victim narrative is paper-thin when confronted with the weight of a binder filled with the truth. He proved that a single leader, armed with the facts and an unapologetic love for his country, can dismantle years of media-protected deception in just 90 minutes. This wasn't just a political win. It was a cultural restoration of the idea that representing America is a sacred privilege, not a platform for personal resentment. We have entered a new era where "love it or leave it" is more than a slogan. It is the standard of accountability for anyone who seeks to lead us. We have seen that the American people, from every background and every walk of life, are hungry for leaders who will defend our flag without a but or an apology. The fall of Ilhan Omar's career serves as a permanent warning to the swamp and the radical left. If you plan to attack the country that saved you, you better be prepared for the man from Queens to bring the receipts. The truth is an unstoppable force, and once it is unleashed, no amount of identity politics can put it back in the bottle. If you believe that this journey through the truth has been as powerful for you as it has been for millions of other patriots, then I have one final request. Please comment, love it or leave it below, hit that subscribe button, and share this video with everyone who still believes in the greatness of America. Your support is the fuel for this movement, and together, we will ensure that our leaders always put America first. Thank you for standing with us. Thank you for seeking the truth, and most importantly, thank you for loving this great nation. The fight continues, but after tonight, we know exactly how to win. Stay loud, stay proud, and God bless the United States of America.